Ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine sitting down to a Christmas dinner, expecting warmth and love, only to hear your own family say you don't belong? That's exactly what happened to Sophie Miller, a 74-year-old widow from a small coastal town in Maine. For years, Sophie poured her heart into raising her son, Daniel, in a little house by the sea. She thought family was forever, but one icy remark from her daughter-in-law, Laura, shattered that dream. "You're too old, too simple for our world." Worse, Daniel stood by, silent, as Sophie was cast out of their lives. Alone on Christmas Eve, Sophie faced a choice: let betrayal break her, or fight to reclaim her dignity. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a tale of resilience, of a mother's love tested by greed, and of a woman who found strength in the ashes of betrayal. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's walk through Sophie's journey together. Trust me, you won't forget this one. Sophie Miller was no stranger to hard work. Born in the sleepy town of Bar Harbor, Maine, she grew up in a world of lobster boats, foggy mornings, and close-knit neighbors. At 74, her silver hair and weathered hands told a story of a life well lived. But it was her eyes, bright with love and quiet strength, that revealed the heart of a woman who had given everything for her family. Sophie's husband, Henry, was a carpenter, known for crafting furniture that filled homes with warmth. Together, they dreamed of a simple life in their little house by the sea, a white clapboard cottage with a wraparound porch and a view of the Atlantic. They bought it in 1975, pouring every penny into its mortgage. It was more than a house. It was their sanctuary, where they raised their only child, Daniel, and where Sophie planned to spend her golden years. When Henry passed away from cancer in 1990, Sophie was left to raise 9-year-old Daniel alone. Money was tight, but Sophie never complained. She took a job as a seamstress at a local shop, stitching dresses and curtains late into the night. Her fingers bled from needle pricks, but she'd smile, saying, "This is for Daniel's future." She sold homemade pies at the town's farmers market every Saturday, saving every dollar for his college fund. On Thanksgiving, when neighbors gathered for turkey and cranberry sauce, Sophie would bake an extra pie for Daniel, even if it meant skipping her own slice. Daniel was her pride and joy. A bright boy with his father's easy smile, he excelled in school. Dreaming of becoming an architect, Sophie scrimped and saved, selling a small plot of land Henry had left her to pay for Daniel's tuition at the University of Maine. When he graduated, she stood in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, clutching a photo of Henry. "We did it," she whispered to the sky. Every Christmas, Sophie and Daniel decorated the cottage with twinkling lights and a modest tree. She'd knit him a scarf, and he'd carve a wooden ornament, a tradition from Henry. Those moments were Sophie's treasure, proof that love could weather any storm. She believed Daniel would always be her anchor, just as she had been his. But life has a way of shifting like the tides. In 2015, Daniel met Laura, a polished marketing executive from a wealthy Boston family. Laura was charming, with a sharp wit and a taste for luxury. At first, Sophie welcomed her, baking cookies for their visits and sharing stories of Daniel's childhood. Laura smiled politely, but Sophie sensed a distance, a flicker of judgment in her eyes. Still, Sophie thought, she makes Daniel happy. That's enough. When Daniel and Laura married in a lavish ceremony in 2018, Sophie wore her best dress, a simple navy frock she'd sewn herself. She felt out of place among Laura's family. With their designer suits and talk of summer homes. But Daniel hugged her tightly, whispering, "Thanks for everything, Mom." Sophie clung to that moment, believing their bond was unbreakable. As the years passed, Daniel and Laura settled in Boston, living in a sleek condo with floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophie stayed in Bar Harbor, content with her cats, Daisy and Whiskers, and her quiet routine. She'd call Daniel on Sundays, sharing updates about the town's 4th of July parade or the church bake sale. But his replies grew shorter, his visits rarer. Sophie told herself he was busy, building his career. She didn't want to be a burden. Every Mother's Day, Sophie hoped for a card or a call. Some years, Daniel sent flowers. Others, she'd sit by the phone, telling herself he'd call tomorrow. But she never stopped loving him, never stopped believing in the boy who'd once run to her with open arms. The house by the sea, filled with memories of Henry and Daniel, was her refuge, a reminder of the family she'd fought for. Little did Sophie know, the tides of change were gathering strength, ready to sweep away everything she held dear. The holidays, once a time of joy, would soon become the stage for a betrayal that would test her heart like never before. By 2023, Sophie noticed a shift in Daniel. His calls were hurried, his tone distracted. When she invited him for Thanksgiving, he'd say, "Laura's family is hosting, Mom. It's a big deal." Sophie understood, or so she thought. She'd spend the holiday with friends, like Margaret, who'd bring pumpkin pie and laughter to the cottage. But deep down, Sophie longed for Daniel's presence, for the days when they'd carve the turkey together, laughing over old stories. Laura's influence grew stronger. She'd redecorated Daniel's life, from his wardrobe to his priorities. During rare visits to Bar Harbor, Laura would glance at the cottage with a tight smile, commenting, "It's quaint, Sophie, but so rustic." Sophie brushed it off, but the words stung. She began to feel like an outsider in her son's world, a relic of a simpler time Laura seemed to despise. In November 2023, Daniel called with an invitation that surprised Sophie. "Mom, why don't you join us for Christmas at Laura's parents' place in Boston? It'll be great." Sophie hesitated. She loved her quiet Christmases by the sea, with carols on the radio, and her cats curled by the fire. But the thought of being with Daniel warmed her heart. "I'd love to," she said, packing her best sweater and a homemade fruitcake. The Boston mansion was a world apart from Bar Harbor. Crystal chandeliers gleamed, and the dining room table was set with fine china for a Christmas Eve feast. Laura's family, her parents, siblings, and their spouses, filled the room with laughter and chatter about stock portfolios and ski trips. Sophie sat quietly, her hands folded, feeling like a fish out of water. Daniel was attentive at first, but Laura's subtle glances made Sophie uneasy. As dessert was served, Laura leaned forward, her smile sharp as a blade. "Sophie, you're awfully quiet. This must be overwhelming for you. Honestly, you just don't fit in with my family. You're too old, too simple. It's not the right setting for you." The room fell silent. Sophie's heart stopped, her fork frozen midair. She looked at Daniel, expecting him to defend her, to say something, anything. But he stared at his plate, his jaw tight, his silence louder than any words. "Daniel," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. He glanced up, his eyes avoiding hers. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. "Laura thinks it's better if you don't come to these things." The words hit like a tidal wave. Sophie felt the air leave her lungs, the warmth of Christmas replaced by a chilling rejection. She stood, her chair scraping the floor, and excused herself, barely holding back tears. Back at the cottage, Sophie sat alone on Christmas Eve, the lights on her tree dimmed by her grief. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give Laura that power. But inside, something broke. The house felt emptier. The waves outside louder. Her friends, Margaret and Anna, arrived the next day, bringing food and comfort. Over coffee, Sophie shared her pain, mentioning the house she'd always planned to leave to Daniel. "It's his legacy," she said, her voice hollow. Anna shook her head. "Sophie, you've earned that house. After the way they treated you, they don't deserve it." Margaret nodded. "Love is a two-way street, Sophie. Daniel's made his choice." Their words sparked something in Sophie, a flicker of defiance. She'd spent her life giving, but maybe it was time to take back what was hers. That night, Sophie pulled out her will, written years ago, when Daniel was still her world. She stared at the line, naming him as the heir to the house by the sea. Her hand trembled as she held the pen, Laura's cruel words echoing. "You don't fit in." No, Sophie thought. "I won't let them take my dignity." The seed of resolve was planted, setting the stage for a battle she never imagined she'd fight. The weeks after Christmas were a blur of quiet anger for Sophie. She tried to move on, tending to her garden and knitting scarves for the church bazaar. But Laura's words and Daniel's silence haunted her. The house by the sea, once a haven, felt like a reminder of what she'd lost. Not just her son, but her place in his life. She confided in Margaret, who urged her to protect her legacy. "You're not just fighting for a house, Sophie," Margaret said. "You're fighting for yourself." In January 2024, Sophie met with her lawyer, Thomas, a kind but aging man who'd handled her affairs since Henry's death. She explained her decision to change her will, removing Daniel as the sole heir. "I want the house to stay mine," she said firmly. "Maybe I'll donate it to the town for a community center someday, but not Daniel. Not after what he's done." Thomas nodded, promising to draft a new will. But Sophie's resolve was tested sooner than she expected. In February, Daniel called, his voice unnervingly calm. "Mom, I heard you're changing the will. That's not fair. The house is my inheritance. Dad would have wanted me to have it." Sophie's heart clenched at the mention of Henry, but she stood her ground. "Daniel, you made your choice on Christmas Eve. This house is mine, and I decide what happens to it." The call ended with Daniel's voice turning cold. "You're making a mistake, Mom. I'll fight this." Sophie hung up, her hands shaking. She didn't know how far he'd go, but she sensed Laura's hand behind his words, pulling the strings. A week later, Sophie received a call from Thomas, his voice unsteady. "Sophie, we need to talk. There's an issue with your will." Her stomach dropped. At his office, Thomas confessed, his face flushed with guilt. "Daniel's been coming to me, pressuring me to alter the will back in his favor. He said you were confused, that you didn't mean to change it. I made some changes without telling you. I'm so sorry." Sophie's blood ran cold. "You betrayed me, Thomas," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How could you?" Thomas stammered. "He didn't pay me, Sophie, but he was so convincing. I thought I was helping." Disgusted, Sophie stormed out, vowing to find a new lawyer. The betrayal cut deeper than Laura's words. Her own son had gone behind her back, manipulating her legacy. Sophie hired Richard, a young, sharp lawyer recommended by Margaret. Richard listened to her story, his eyes blazing with determination. "We'll fix this, Sophie. Daniel's actions are unethical, and we'll prove it." Together, they gathered evidence: the original will, Thomas's confession, and records of Daniel's visits to Thomas's office. Richard warned her, "Daniel might take this to court. Are you ready?" Sophie nodded, though fear gnawed at her. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was her life's work, her memories of Henry, her sanctuary. She couldn't let Daniel and Laura steal it. In March, Daniel escalated. He and Laura arrived at the cottage unannounced, their faces a mask of entitlement. Laura spoke first, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sophie, let's be reasonable. You're old, living alone. You don't need this house. Sell it to us, and we'll take care of you." Sophie laughed bitterly. "Take care of me? Like you did at Christmas." Daniel stepped forward, his tone pleading but edged with frustration. "Mom, this is Dad's legacy. You can't just take it from me. If you don't sign it over, we'll go to court. We'll win." Sophie's heart broke at his words, but her resolve hardened. "Do what you must, Daniel. I'm done being pushed around." That night, a nor'easter swept through Bar Harbor, rain pounding the cottage. Sophie sat by the fireplace, clutching a photo of Henry and Daniel as a boy. The storm outside mirrored the one in her heart. She felt alone, but not defeated. She whispered to the photo, "I'm fighting for us, Henry. For what we built." The court date was set for April. As Sophie prepared, she faced her deepest fear, losing not just the house, but any chance of reconciling with Daniel. Yet she knew she had to stand firm. Laura's cruelty and Daniel's betrayal had pushed her to the edge, but they'd also awakened a strength she hadn't known she had. The high tide of betrayal had come, and Sophie was ready to face it head-on. The courtroom in Bar Harbor was small but imposing, its wooden pews filled with locals who'd heard whispers of Sophie's battle. On April 15, 2024, Sophie sat beside Richard, her hands clasped tightly. Across the room, Daniel and Laura sat with their lawyer, their faces stern. Sophie's heart ached seeing her son, but she reminded herself why she was here, to reclaim her dignity, her home, her life. Richard presented the case with precision, detailing Daniel's attempts to manipulate the will and Thomas's complicity. Thomas, guilt-ridden, testified on Sophie's behalf, admitting his error. "I betrayed Sophie's trust," he said, his voice breaking. "Daniel pressured me, and I was wrong to comply." The courtroom buzzed, but Sophie kept her eyes on the judge, praying for justice. When Sophie took the stand, her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "This house isn't just property," she said, looking at Daniel. "It's where I raised you, where your father and I built our dreams. I gave you everything, Daniel, but you threw me away. I'm here to protect what's mine, not out of greed, but out of love for the life I've lived." Daniel's eyes flickered with shame, but Laura's glare remained icy. The judge listened intently, his face unreadable. After hours of testimony, he adjourned, promising a ruling within weeks. Sophie left the courthouse, exhausted but proud. She'd spoken her truth, and that was a victory in itself. The waiting was agony. Sophie spent her days walking the beach, the spring breeze carrying the scent of salt and renewal. She attended church, finding solace in hymns and the community's support. On Mother's Day, she received no card from Daniel, but Margaret and Anna brought flowers, reminding her she wasn't alone. On May 1st, the call came. "Ms. Miller, the judge has ruled in your favor," Richard said. "The house remains yours, and the will is upheld. Daniel has no claim." Sophie sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. She'd won, not just the house, but her right to be seen, to matter. Daniel and Laura didn't contact her, their silence a final confirmation of their defeat. But Sophie's victory felt hollow. The house was hers, but the rift with her son remained. She threw herself into her routine, baking for the church, tending her garden. But the emptiness lingered. One evening, as summer approached, Sophie sat on her porch, watching the sunset. The 4th of July was near, and the town was buzzing with plans for fireworks. She thought of past celebrations, when Daniel would chase fireflies in the yard. The memory brought tears, but also clarity. She'd fought for her dignity, but maybe there was room for healing. In June, Daniel called. His voice was hesitant. "Mom, I'm sorry, I was wrong about everything. Laura and I, we're separating. I see now how much I hurt you. Can we talk?" Sophie's heart wavered, but she agreed to meet at a cafe in town. At the cafe, Daniel looked worn, his confidence gone. "I let Laura control me," he admitted. "I thought money, status, mattered more than you. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to try." Sophie listened, her emotions a tangle of pain and hope. "It'll take time, Daniel," she said, "but I'm willing to start." Over the summer, Daniel visited regularly, bringing small gestures, a scarf, a photo of him as a boy. They talked, not about the house or the will, but about life, memories, and the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. On Thanksgiving 2024, Daniel joined Sophie at the cottage, just the two of them. They carved the turkey, sharing quiet laughter, the wounds slowly healing. Sophie learned a profound lesson. Family isn't just blood, it's the love you choose to nurture. She'd reclaimed her house, but more importantly, her strength. The house by the sea was no longer a battleground. It was a home filled with new possibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, what did you think of Sophie's story? Have you ever faced a betrayal that tested your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and hope. Until next time, keep the faith. Family is forever, but so is your strength.